The emergency session convened at OKW headquarters during late April 1945 assembled surviving senior military commanders to address reality that German defensive capacity had collapsed and that organized resistance would cease within days. General Alfred Jodl presented situation assessments documenting Soviet forces occupying Berlin, while American and British armies controlled Western Germany, creating fragmentation, preventing coordinated military operations. Admiral Karl Dönitz, recently designated Hitler's successor by testament, transmitted from bunker faced immediate decisions about whether to order capitulation or attempt continuing resistance using forces still under German control in isolated pockets. The recognition that Third Reich was ending required addressing practical questions about surrender procedures, protection of German civilians from advancing Allied forces, and fate of military personnel facing captivity or war crimes prosecution. The institutional breakdown affecting German command structure meant that orders issued from central authority couldn't reach subordinate units, as communication networks had been destroyed by Allied bombing and ground advances. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, commanding Armed Forces High Command, attempted maintaining administrative functions, coordinating scattered forces, but acknowledged that effective military organization no longer existed. The regional commanders, including Field Marshal Ferdinand Schörner in Czechoslovakia, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring in southern Germany, and Admiral Hans-Georg von Friedeburg, commanding naval forces, operated independently, making tactical decisions without central direction. The dissolution of unified command created a situation where formal surrender required negotiating with multiple commanders controlling remnant forces rather than executing single directive from supreme authority. Colonel General Gottlob Berger, serving in various administrative capacities during final weeks, witnessed systematic destruction of governmental infrastructure as ministries evacuated Berlin and as records were burned to prevent capture. The observation was that Nazi regime's final acts involved eliminating evidence of crimes while abandoning populations to Allied occupation without provisions for maintaining order or protecting civilians. The bureaucratic collapse meant that no authority existed for organizing evacuations, distributing remaining food supplies, or maintaining utilities in areas still under German control. The institutional failure extended beyond military defeat to include complete breakdown of civil administration, leaving German population without governance during transition to Allied occupation. General Hans Krebs, conducting negotiations with Soviet commanders in Berlin during May, first attempted arranging terms that would preserve some German military organization while acknowledging that unconditional surrender was inevitable. The discussions revealed Soviet determination to impose complete capitulation without allowing conditions that might preserve German military structures. The rejection of negotiated settlement reflected Allied policy established at Casablanca Conference, requiring Germany's unconditional surrender without political compromises. Krebs' suicide following failed negotiations illustrated despair among officers, recognizing that no alternatives existed between complete surrender and futile continued resistance, resulting in additional casualties without affecting outcome. Admiral Dönitz, establishing provisional government at Flensburg following Hitler's death, faced contradiction between legal authority as designated successor and practical powerlessness as Allied forces controlled German territory. The decisions involved whether to issue surrender orders immediately minimizing further casualties, or whether to delay capitulation, enabling German forces in East to withdraw westward, escaping Soviet captivity. The calculation was that extending resistance by days might enable evacuating hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians from eastern territories to zones that would be occupied by Western allies. The moral complexity involved trading additional combat deaths for possibility of improving surrender circumstances for personnel and civilians who might otherwise face harsh Soviet occupation. General Alfred Jodl, selected to conduct surrender negotiations with Western allies at Eisenhower's headquarters in Reims, attempted securing terms allowing staged capitulation where forces in East would continue fighting Soviets while ceasing resistance in West. The proposal reflected hope that Western allies might accept arrangement preserving German forces as potential barrier against Soviet expansion. General Dwight Eisenhower's rejection of partial surrender and insistence on simultaneous capitulation on all fronts demonstrated Allied unity requiring Germany's complete military defeat without allowing exploitation of coalition tensions. The unconditional surrender, signed May 7th at Reims and ratified May 8th in Berlin, represented total military collapse, eliminating Third Reich as political entity. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, attending final surrender ceremony in Berlin, conducted by Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov, experienced humiliation of representing defeated regimes signing documents, formalizing Germany's unconditional capitulation. The symbolic importance of surrender occurring in Berlin City that Hitler had vowed to defend emphasized completeness of German defeat. The ceremony's timing during early morning hours of May 9th ensured that Soviet Union could announce victory on May 9th, rather than sharing date with Western allies who recognized May 8th as Victory in Europe Day. The political choreography demonstrated Allied determination to mark Germany's defeat through public ceremonies emphasizing Axis powers' complete military and political destruction. General Heinz Guderian, relieved from command during March 1945 following disagreements with Hitler, observed regime's final collapse from detention, where Western allies had placed him pending investigation of potential war crimes. The perspective from captivity involved recognizing that professional military career, culminating in senior command positions, had ended in national catastrophe that military expertise hadn't prevented. The intellectual reckoning required acknowledging that Wehrmacht's tactical proficiency and operational excellence had been expended in service of regime whose strategic objectives were unachievable and whose ideological extremism had guaranteed Allied determination to fight until unconditional surrender. The personal tragedy for officers like Guderian involved confronting that professional dedication had contributed to catastrophe rather than to legitimate national defense. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, captured by British forces during May, faced interrogation about military operations and potential prosecution for war crimes committed by forces under his command. The legal situation confronting senior Wehrmacht officers involved distinguishing between conventional military operations and criminal acts, including massacres of civilians, mistreatment of prisoners, and cooperation with SS units conducting genocide. The defense arguments emphasized that professional soldiers had conducted military campaigns according to established laws of war, and that criminal activities were responsibility of Nazi political leadership rather than military commanders. The prosecution response documented that Wehrmacht had been complicit in regime's crimes through providing logistical support for mass murders, implementing criminal orders, and creating conditions enabling atrocities. Admiral Hans-Georg von Friedeburg, conducting naval surrender negotiations, committed suicide on May 23rd rather than facing interrogation about German naval operations. The death illustrated psychological crisis affecting military commanders, confronting personal responsibility for serving regime whose defeat revealed extent of criminality that military institutions had enabled. The pattern of senior officer suicides during weeks following surrender reflected inability to reconcile professional military identity with recognition that service to Third Reich involved complicity in unprecedented crimes against humanity. General Anton Dostler, executed by firing squad in December 1945. following conviction for ordering execution of American prisoners, represented first instance of Allied prosecution of Wehrmacht officer for war crimes. The trial established precedent that following orders wasn't acceptable defense for criminal acts, and that military commanders bore personal responsibility for violations of laws of war. The legal principle affected subsequent proceedings against senior officers who claimed that professional military duty required implementing directives even when those directives constituted crimes. The Nuremberg trials, beginning November 1945, included prosecutions of senior military leaders, including Keitel, Jodl, and Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, for planning aggressive war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The proceedings documented Wehrmacht's institutional involvement in Nazi regime's criminal activities, challenging post-war narrative that professional military had maintained honor while political leadership had been criminal. The convictions and executions of Keitel and Jodl in October 1946 marked Allied determination to hold military leadership accountable for regime's crimes, rather than accepting distinction between honorable soldiers and criminal politicians. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, detained by Western allies, testified during war crimes investigations, while avoiding prosecution due to age and health conditions. The perspective from detention involved observing younger officers facing trial for operations that senior commanders had authorized, creating moral questions about responsibility distribution within military hierarchy. The institutional defense that Wehrmacht had fought honorable war while Nazi party organs committed crimes was challenged by evidence documenting military participation in criminal activities, from planning aggressive invasions through executing illegal orders against civilians and prisoners. The custody conditions for senior Wehrmacht officers varied based on Allied perceptions of individual culpability and usefulness for intelligence purposes. Officers who cooperated with interrogators providing information about German military capabilities and Soviet forces received preferential treatment, while those refusing cooperation or identified with regime's worst crimes faced harsh confinement pending trial. The differential treatment created incentives for officers to distance themselves from Nazi ideology and to emphasize professional military identity separate from political commitments. The practical dissolution of Wehrmacht occurred as units surrendered individually to Allied forces, with soldiers entering captivity under conditions varying dramatically between Western and Soviet zones. The personnel captured by Americans and British received treatment consistent with Geneva Conventions, with repatriation occurring progressively through 1945 to 1948. The soldiers captured by Soviet forces faced extended captivity, with hundreds of thousands dying from malnutrition, disease, and harsh labor conditions before survivors were repatriated during 1950s. The differential treatment reflected broader Allied divisions about post-war order that Cold War would crystallize into permanent separation of Germany into competing systems. The institutional memory of Wehrmacht's final weeks influenced post-war German military culture as Bundeswehr, established during 1950s, incorporated lessons about civil-military relations and limits of military obedience to political authority. The constitutional framework created for West German armed forces emphasized parliamentary control and individual soldiers' obligation to refuse illegal orders, reflecting determination to prevent military from again serving authoritarian regime. The historical reckoning with Wehrmacht's role in Third Reich remained contested, with some veterans maintaining narrative of honorable military service, while historians documented extensive military complicity in regime's crimes. When German High Command faced end of Third Reich during April to May 1945, the experience involved confronting complete military defeat, institutional collapse, moral reckoning about complicity in criminal regime, and practical decisions about surrender procedures and personnel protection. The senior commanders who had directed military operations during 6 years of warfare faced choices between suicide, captivity, and cooperation with Allied authorities investigating war crimes. The dissolution of unified command structure meant that Third Reich's end occurred through multiple local surrenders rather than single coordinated capitulation, reflecting fragmentation that Allied advances had created. The emotional responses among senior officers ranged from defiant acceptance that military service required fighting until ordered to stop, through pragmatic calculation that further resistance served no purpose, to despair prompting suicide rather than facing defeat's consequences. The psychological burden combined professional failure at losing war with moral recognition that regime served had committed unprecedented crimes. The coping mechanisms varied, with some officers maintaining that military honor remained intact despite political leadership's criminality, while others acknowledged that Wehrmacht's complicity extended beyond following orders to active participation in criminal enterprise. The unconditional surrender, signed May 1945, eliminated Third Reich as political entity while creating legal and moral questions about military leadership's responsibility that subsequent trials and historical scholarship would address. The institutional end of Wehrmacht represented not just military defeat, but collapse of professional military culture that had served state regardless of regime's character, creating necessity for fundamental reconstruction of German military institutions under democratic oversight, preventing repetition of catastrophe that service to Nazi regime had produced.